Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, SD WAN 2020, What IT Leaders Need to Know. My name is Joel Anderson. I am the VP of Marketing here with Tier 4 Advisors. Pleased to present today's session, which will be hosted by our very own Kelly Higgins, who is our Senior Vice President of IT Solutions Architecture here at Tier 4 Advisors. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available for replay, along with the contact information of all of our panelists, which will be distributed after the webinar. And also, we'd love to be able to hear from you during today's webinar. If you have questions related to SD-WAN, anything for our panelists that you'd like for them to go over or dive into in greater detail, please use the Q&A feature that is down at the bottom of your screen to be able to ask us questions. And we will field those towards the end of the webinar if we have time. And we'll make sure to follow up with you afterwards if we're not able to get to all those questions. So without further ado, I will pass the time over to Kelly and to our expert panel. Kelly, the time is yours.
Great, thanks, Joel. I'd like to welcome our audience and our panelists today. And I'll ask they do a brief introduction, starting with ron.beer of Aryaka.
Hey, good afternoon, Kelly. Thanks. We appreciate you having us on. My name is ron.beer. I'm the Senior Director of Channel Accounts for Aryaka nationwide. Really happy to be on here and looking forward to a good panel discussion.
Thank you, Ron. Charlie.magee with Cato Networks.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Pleasure to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to share our story. I'm the Regional Sales Director for the Southeast United States for Cato Networks. Looking forward to a fun conversation. Thank you so much.
We have ryanb with BigLeaf.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is ryanb with BigLeaf Networks. I'm the Director for Channel Sales here in the East Coast for BigLeaf, and I look forward to hopefully educating you guys a little bit today on what we do.
Thank you. Delia with BCMOne.
Thanks, Kelly. Hello, everybody. Delia, Director of Managed Services for BCMOne. Look forward to sharing with you guys.
Thank you. So let's get started with the questions. Ron, can you provide the audience with your view of SD-WAN in its simplest form and offer some of the different deployment options that are available? I'll ask Andrew to follow it up as well.
Sure. Thanks. You know, in many ways, SD-WAN has almost become a marketing term out there. So much is encompassed by it. It's changed over the years. Obviously, for us here at Aryaka, you know, being an 11-year-old company, we've really seen it transition over that time period. But really, you know, what SD-WAN's meant to do is improve performance issues, you know, driving apps to the cloud. In some cases, it can potentially save money, but not always. I think people make a mistake if they go out there and try to sell SD-WAN as a cost savings option. I don't think that's always the case. But really, it's providing more functionality for what you have now and really taking you into the next step and into the future with your telecom needs.
Andrew, anything to add?
Yeah, I do agree with a lot of what Ron did mention there. I mean, in its simplest form, it's just a way to create secure tunnels and secure connectivity between locations, whether that's your own locations and your own data center as a client or your cloud, public cloud, Azure, AWS, etc. Do totally agree that, you know, a lot of it is buzzwords out there. And definitely agree that it's not always a cost savings opportunity. There are things that we can do to look at the overall solution to lower the overall total cost of ownership. But you know, I'll say pound for pound, we're adding to the network at the end of the day, not removing.
All right, great, thank you. So why would a company look at SD-WAN? You know, what are the pain points or the drivers that would lead a company to want to adopt this technology? And Charlie, I'll let you kick that one off.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Kelly. We touched on some initially, right? I know, you know, cost savings is typically the initial idea that folks come to us with, and you know, we try to challenge that, right? Because as we've already stated, you could be cost neutral, or it could be, you know, the additional cost at the end of the day going down the SD-WAN path. But two biggest needs that keep coming up for us here at Cato is visibility into their network traffic, right? And also control as well. So that's, we're talking about being able to control, which applications are prioritized and things of that nature. So that comes up pretty regularly because, if you're working with a legacy, call it organization, you may not have access to that, right? That's one that comes up pretty regularly. And also when you talk about expansion of, our customers' networks, right? Could be expanding to public cloud, SaaS applications like we talked about, could be expanding to mobile, could be expanding overseas, right? So to be able to optimize and secure those connections to further, maybe enhance M&A activity in the future, those are some of the pain points that I hear the most.
And are there requirements, Ryan, for the infrastructure? What does a company need to consider to deploy one of the solution options?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I was going to add into that last question too, with some of the pain points and what we see really around needing predictability in the network. I think that's a good word that we like to use a lot, and predictability, and that kind of goes along with visibility and reliability, all these different words. But being able to predict what's going to happen if a problem occurs, how your applications are going to perform if a circuit has an issue. I think that's a big pain point we see, is just knowing what's going to happen when that problem does occur. So when you're talking about infrastructure that's already there and what's a need, in specific to BigLeaf, we sit outside of a customer firewall, so we get a little bit more into details of that, where we deploy alongside any existing security a customer wants to use. But from more of a conceptual sense, it's having redundant internet connections, having two or more internet connections there to be able to aggregate together and seamlessly route your applications in between those two different ISPs.
You mentioned applications. Andrew, what about what's great traffic pattern for SD WAN? Is it voice? Is it a database? Other applications?
All things, right? So everything nowadays is an application that rides on top of a data network. SD WAN is going to give you that flexibility to identify the application at the application layer and then take appropriate action, right? So take voice. Voice is something that we all try to solve for, right? It's a critical application and it has very strict SLAs. What the SD-WAN software will do is identify this is voice traffic, and then it will take the next steps. The next steps could be do something special with that, right? Add a policy to it that is going to route that call over both connections that you might have, WAN connections, that is, simultaneously. To its destination. And when it gets to the destination, the path with the lowest latency or lowest jitter, that traffic will get there first, and then the traffic that was going over that secondary path, which is called packet duplication in certain cases, that will get dropped. So basically, if you think about it, it's adding another layer of redundancy for certain traffic. Again, picking on voice because it's one of the hardest to solve for in a network. You could, in that scenario I just described, you could actually unplug one of the circuits mid-conversation and that call will continue. Again, that's packet duplication. It's available on some of the SD-WANs that are out there. But again, micro-segmentation or should say separation of traffic on a network, that's going to be your traditional networking terms that are out there, VLANs, VRFs, all of those things are supported in an SD-WAN environment.
Thank you, Andrew. So clients look for a number of features as you're working with them to help procure a new solution. What are some of the key features with SD-WAN? What makes SD-WAN a game changer? Is it security? Is it scalability? Easier, simplified operation? Charlie, why don't you take that and give us your view? Can you hear us, Charlie? All right, let's move on. Ron, do you have a, can you?
There he is. I think
Yeah. There he is. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, apologies. I'm back.
Sorry, Charlie, but that's a commercial, right? Go ahead,
yeah, so where were we? Sorry about that.
Question. Give us your viewpoint on features of SD-WAN.
Sure. So I think the value we're talking about is, resiliency at the edge, right? If you talk about not just leveraging a primary connection, but also leveraging a backup connection, right? So you can prioritize traffic and send the applications that are most important to your business down that prioritized path, right? So we do that at the edge here at Cato Networks, and we also have built-in resiliency within our core network at our closest POP, right? 2 tier 1 providers providing that additional layer of resiliency. So when you're, you talk about with traffic moving off premise, right, moving to the internet a little bit more, you need to keep in mind that, the potential organizations and providers that are out there that have already thought that, taken that into account, and they have that in mind, right, as they built out their platform and as they build out their roadmap for what's next for them. So I think initially is the resiliency is what I would touch on.
Ron, do you have anything to add? What SD-WAN viewed as a game changer? Maybe it's further along in the the Gartner hype cycle, if you will. But I think it's not quite matured yet. What are you seeing?
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it's all the way there. It's getting there. I mean, I think we're definitely reaching the point of maturity, but it's definitely not there. But one of the things that I really wanted to touch on was the scalability issue. I think that's really important for people to understand. We're now talking about being able to deploy and get people up and running in days, not weeks. And I think that's really an important piece. Is we all know the pain points of getting last mile and getting it in there and getting it turned up. But in most cases, in virtually all the cases, they already have the connectivity. That's not the issue anymore. So with the simplicity of being able, and this is pretty much across the board, I think for everybody on here, is just the simplicity of being able to get people up and running very, very quickly is a game changer.
Good. And Ryan, do you have anything to add on that point, or reliability?
When we're talking about reliability for cloud applications, like we've been thinking about VoIP and Zoom and Office 365, Salesforce, these critical applications that customers are running over their internet connections now, that's what we're all here for, is to make sure that those applications can perform if a connection does have a minor problem that would have otherwise affected that application. So I like to think of it as, you're kind of putting a foundation in now for your network so that anything you put on top of that is going to be strong and sturdy and can perform. So it's kind of a good analogy. I like to think about almost like your cloud foundation for your network.
Right. Yeah. And Charlie and Ron, we've talked a little bit about the options earlier, but I kind of want to dive a little deeper into those. And what are the differences, or maybe even the advantages of each? So, Charlie, I'll let you start there.
So the advantages in terms of as a service, is that what we're talking?
Well, yeah, or the different deployment options. Why would a client pick?
Sure. So there's a few options out there, as I'm sure you can imagine. There's either it's fully managed for you on your behalf, right? And there's a process where professional services organization like ours or others in the market would handle that deployment for you. That could potentially be disruptive. And the idea, we talk about simplicity, and we also talk about, reducing overhead, right? And our platform is non-disruptive from that perspective, right? So it's not a project that would take you out of your business, for the course of say 3 to 6 months. Potentially not a large capital expenditure. So we try to reduce friction from that perspective. So that's if it's fully rolled out from our PS organization. Also, you have the option where, you kind of roll your own essentially, right? So say you start with a few first locations, right? Well, our team can help you through those. And as you're deploying those first few sites, then you can essentially shadow our engineers, and then you can essentially take the deployment from there. We've had great success with that. And that allows, customers to take ownership and also get very comfortable in terms of, configuring their network.
Ron?
Yeah, I agree with Charlie. In many cases, we're very similar. I mean, ours is a consume, not construct model, which I think is very important. You're not having a lot of capital expenditure. With our layer 2 private network all over the world, our equipment is already on the ground. Our network access points are in country almost everywhere. So speed, again, of deployment I think is really critical. Again, we're not waiting a long time to get people up and running. I think those are real important pieces.
Hey, Kelly, can I add something there too, real quick?
Please. Yeah.
I was going to say too, I think one way to think about it is there are SD-WAN solutions that have a network, and there are SD-WAN solutions that don't have a network. And there are some that are just a premise device that handle failover and some aggregation at the site. And then there are, I kind of call them full-blown SD-WAN solutions, like what you hear everybody on this panel, that have their own network behind it with data centers where they can peer with the cloud providers customers are trying to access. So if your customers are starting to look at more different types of solutions, you'll see that some don't have a network behind it, which is really important if you're using applications that are running over those internet connections.
Good point. Thanks. You know, companies are constantly looking for ways to improve network performance, or more importantly, application performance. Can SD-WAN really improve a business application? Andrew, you talked a little bit about voice earlier. Ryan, what do you counter to that?
Well, I guess I segued that myself, because if it has a network behind it, then yes, it can improve. That was really on accident there. But yeah, if it has a network behind it, then yes, it will perform, it will improve your application reliability and overall performance, because you're getting that prioritization for those applications now over those internet connections. So you are the software in the device being able to see a Zoom call versus a Netflix session, or a Spotify streaming versus someone trying to do a VoIP call at the same time, and being able to detect the differences and prioritize accordingly. So you're not losing your performance for your mission critical applications if other users are using less critical applications at the same time. Yeah. So voice being the biggest driver for what we do, because you can hear every minor issue on a voice call. Obviously, we've all experienced that. So.
Right. Andrew, anything to follow up from your previous discussion?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, you know, SD-WAN has the ability to improve the overall user experience, you know, and not just for voice, right? It's for anything. You could prioritize all your business critical applications and kind of put them in hierarchical order, and, you know, have a policy that's going to prioritize it over some other traffic. YouTube, you know, you could put down at the bottom of the pile. So it gets really granular, gives you a lot of control. Whether there's a network behind it or not, right? Just the SD-WAN, you know, software itself has that capability. You know, we're able to offload internet traffic directly, or you could hub it back to a centralized spot, or if you're using a third party you know, gateway firewall, you could do that as well. So it's very flexible in the design options that you have to create any kind of topology, and of course prioritize any business critical applications that you have out there.
Thanks, Andrew. You know, Tier 4 helps clients understand the landscape of a certain technology. SD-WAN, when it first rolled out, there was fear, uncertainty, and doubt, concerns over cost, or it's more complicated to deploy, or less. It won't connect to hyperscale public cloud environments. I'd love to hear from some of you on that. Ron, Charlie, start out with how do you debunk those myths?
Well, I think one of the biggest myths we've already touched on is that it's difficult to deploy, difficult to install, and there really couldn't be much easier than what we're all doing. All of the companies on here, this can be. You don't need an IT specialist. You don't need anybody really that is well versed in this. This is really, in many cases, a plug and play. I know here at Aryaka we get the customer on the line, we walk them through it. It's a very easy process for us. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we've had to overcome. And I think secondly also is, I mentioned it before, it's not a cost savings thing. And that's really what people want. If they want to sell that way, I think they're really missing the boat. I know I've said that before, but this is a performance enhancement of your network. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to take you into the next level, take you into the future, take you from what you've been using and show you the next step. We all, and I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but we always remember the transition from frame relay to MPLS. Everybody thought, oh my God, this is never going to work. Well, MPLS was probably one of the most successful network products ever launched in history, probably until SD-WAN. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that same sort of transition.
Yeah. Charlie, anything to add?
Yeah, I think Ron did a great job of covering most of some of the myths out there. So thank you, Ron. And there is commonality in, you know, what we both offer, but I'm going to try to generalize it. I think the one piece that was overlooked for, you know, ever since SD-WAN was introduced to the marketplace to now has been security. And I think what's happening is that, you know, you talk about, you know, the economies of scale, being able to potentially converge physical assets at the edge of your network and potentially cloud enable them. I'm talking about, you know, edge firewall, you know, anti-malware, next-gen anti-malware, IPS and IDS, right? So even Gartner said, you know, with the return of SASE as kind of the future path of SD-WAN, I think now it's getting a much harder look. And we find ourselves in conversations where we actually, not just for our customers, but also for our partners, we simplify that security conversation, right? Because essentially now even, you know, with folks working from home and, you know, now like the folks who essentially, you know, digital transformation happened overnight, now they're taking security into account to make sure that their enterprise is protected as their traffic is, you know, heading through out to the internet. So, so I think that's one of the things that it perceived as a blind spot, which I think now can be incorporated into the conversation.
Thank you. So cost is a factor. MPLS is expensive. We talked about that, but can SD-WAN reduce operational cost? What are, you know, and if so, you know, what are those areas? Where are you guys doing the ROI for clients and saying it is, you know, long-term cheaper, maybe not short-term, I'm not sure, but, you know, where are you seeing the advantages? And Charlie, I'll let you keep talking.
Sure. So what we see is there's a couple of areas of optimization, right? I'll use that term from you know, our customer's perspective. You have the MPLS bucket, and you also have physical asset bucket, whether it be maintenance renewals, whether it be you know, any sort of agreement tied to that. That's where we've seen there is absolutely an ROI to be had. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that ROI is coming in 6 months, coming in a year. I'm not. What I am telling you is that, you know, what we're seeing, and this is just broadly, you know, we're working with, you know, team leads, we're working with managers and directors at our customers. They're fatigued with, you know, the management that they need to do at the edge of the network, right? So if we can simplify some of that for them, right, and also help them migrate to a platform that's essentially cloud ready, if, you know, if that's their path, right? Not every customer's on that path right now, but, you know, a lot of folks have been thinking about that lately, you know, given what's transpired over the last 60 days. So I think there, if you take a look at, you know, the asset, we call it life cycle on premise, and if we're reaching the end of the useful life, then I'd say it's absolutely worth a conversation. But again, it's situational, I would say, but that's what we've seen.
Sure. Andrew, anything to follow up on?
Yeah, sure thing. I think, you know, BCMOne, you know, has, I would say, the most success at saving a client money if that's their end goal. I said earlier, you know, what we do is we look at it holistically, you know, a solution, and we'll build a solution according to the client's business and technical requirements, not just look at, you know, SD-WAN alone. So if a client's overall goal is to reduce operational cost, you know, we would look at everything that they're consuming, whether that's Microsoft. We can look at their contracts for their internet circuits, MPLS. We could look to transition them off of those types of circuits, maybe bring in some broadband, maybe get rid of MPLS, so and reduce and put the DIA in place of it, etc. So if we look at it overall, an overall solution, we can drive the overall total cost of ownership down. And I think that's where, you know, our value comes in the most, because we don't just look at it as an SD-WAN opportunity. Because again, SD-WAN, if you're not changing anything else, we're adding to the network. We're not removing anything or changing anything else. And of course, SD-WAN, as we all know, is you know, an MRC-based licensing structure, right? So we're adding. Again, so if you're not going to look at the whole network and everything that's underlying underneath it, removing hardware, collapsing your security and your routing function into a single device, etc., you're not going to be able to achieve the cost savings that a client might be looking. So, that's where we come into play, and I think we bring tremendous value.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'd like all to give a response on this one, and share your success stories with an implementation, and what do you perceive as a successful SD-WAN implementation? Ryan, why don't you kick that off?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, one we did 2 months ago, we did a 60 location assisted living opportunity, and we have a lot of assisted living customers for voice reliability, 911 access, things like that, where they're rolling us out as a part of their VoIP solution to ensure that quality over their multiple different internet connections. They have fiber and coax at each site. They have WatchGuard firewalls at each site. We sit outside of those WatchGuard firewalls to ensure their cloud reliability for their VoIP and cloud-based EMR application that they're using. So where BigLeaf looks a little bit different in the SD-WAN world is that we sit on the WAN side of the customer firewall always. We never breach that LAN piece of the network. We are solely an SD-WAN provider. We are not a security provider by design. And that's where we look a little bit different in this space and have been around for 7 years now, really because of that differentiator, where there is a significant side of the market that has a need for outside the firewall SD-WAN deployment. That might not be for everybody, but where we fit, that's where we've done a really great job. So focused on cloud reliability and that predictability, but outside of the customer LAN. Yeah, so that kind of, when you talk about implementation, that becomes a 5 to 10 minute self-install for BigLeaf customers, because we're not requiring any of those security changes. So I respectfully a little bit disagree with what Charlie said earlier about incorporating those two together, but that's just from where we differ a little bit, so no worries.
That's okay. And Charlie, now you can counter back.
No, that's absolutely fair. That's why I may respond in my answer, but it sounds like a great project, Ryan. Congratulations. Similar opportunity. It was a 40-site financial customer. We're just wrapping up over the course of the next 30 days. The drivers for them were, their CIO was very cloud first oriented. There was a migration to Zoom. There was a migration to Azure. They were getting out of physical data centers. And they were also needing to, optimize and secure their traffic as it traversed nationally and also globally. They had locations in the UK and locations in China. Some of the other benefits that came out of the engagement was an MPLS replacement project. So one thing that was not mentioned about the value of SD-WAN, I'm going to bring it up right now, is tremendous flexibility at the edge of your network in terms of bandwidth, right? So typically the migrations from MPLS to DIA broadband, we are agnostic from that perspective. So now with 5G kind of gaining traction, folks are using, let's call it retail applications. Folks are using 4G as a backup. We can work with that. We can also work with broadband. It's all going to be dependent upon the needs within that specific location. So I think that like long term, I think security is going to be something where it will be part of the conversation. But to Ryan's point, some folks have already made an investment. Some folks have already, had that part of their environment shored up, right? So sometimes what we've seen is that, we'll work with customers on the edge of their network, and then security may be a future consideration. But yeah, so that's where, we were able to essentially help that customer. They wanted to get away from, maintenance renewals. They also wanted to get away from multiple management interfaces. So they converged their IPS, their anti-malware, next-gen anti-malware, and also the next generation firewall into our cloud along with our edge SD-WAN.
Good deal. Ron, any success stories or use cases that you can outline?
Yeah, the question is what do we consider a successful deployment? And I think for me, it's always, have we met the customer's needs and expectations? And I think that's very important. And, Aryaka made their bones as being the international selection. If companies had international and domestic locations, we were definitely the play there. And I'm going to use a really small a small use case that I thought was pretty cool, where it was a 2-location deal, one in Florida, and the other location was in Prague in the Czech Republic. And it was, a very unique situation. We were able to get them up and running within 5 days, which was really cool. The customer was thrilled. That customer has now actually moved from where they were in Prague to another location. Now they've got much bigger bandwidth, and they're completely satisfied with what we've done. That's one end of it. But we've also done a 100 location, just domestic install. And, we were really telling the customer, tell us how fast you want to go. You want to do 2 a day, 3 a day, 4 a day? It's really up to you. We can accommodate what you need. Once we get our ANAP to the location, we can work as fast as the customer wants. So that's really for us, that's the message that I want to get across.
Thank you. Andrew, so use cases. I know you've helped clients with that perspective from a technology consulting standpoint. What are you seeing?
Yeah, and we are a little different, right? Because we're not an SD WAN provider, right? So we are what we consider SD WAN agnostic. So we have several deployments out there with different vendors, etc. Do want to talk about two because they're unique. And one was a brand new 40+ location greenfield deployment. It was a coffee retailer in the Northeast, and again, greenfield, nice, easy deployment. There was no existing network. Simple, right? We come in, bring in the circuits, brought in the SD WAN, everything worked as designed, met all of their technical and business requirements. That was a nice little layup. One, successful at the end of the day, but it was fundamentally different. This was another retailer, watch, high-end watchmaker. They had an absolute disaster of a network in place. Not documented. Nobody knew what the default gateways were or anything within the network. Again, just an undocumented, unfortunate situation. So in order to make that one successful, because it was a fundamental shift, we were disconnecting all of their MPLS, bringing in new internet circuits, and then putting in Meraki was the SD WAN there. But we had to go in, document their existing network, so we knew, what's going to be my default gateway, what's going to be my DHCP server, etc. Is there third-party IPsec tunnels that we need to worry about? All of those things we had to go in, document before we could go forward. So it was successful at the end of the day, but it definitely took a lot more design work up front and planning in order to get it there. Because it's, in this scenario, it was not just a plug and play. Let me go in there and just, we couldn't do that. It was an existing network in production. So that one was fun to be a part of. At the end of the day, successful, but that's, again, where we come in and we specialize.
Thanks, Andrew. I know SD-WAN has evolved over the years, and this could be a question for all of you as well, and Andrew, including you from your technology viewpoint, but how has SD-WAN evolved? And then what are the new trends you're seeing in the solution space, or what can we expect? Maybe who has that future crystal ball can tell us what's coming next. And then more importantly, how has the recent change of events with the pandemic affected SD-WAN, and how can it help? So that's a multi-part question, but I'll start, Charlie, with you.
Sure, thanks, Kelly. I think like we were saying a little bit earlier, digital transformation is a concept we talked about for 10 years, and it happened overnight, right? So I think that when you talk about needing a plan now, ideally there's not a resurgence, there's not a second pandemic, and Ron will tell you, hopefully we're getting back to normal, very, very soon, right? But unfortunately, we need to prepare for a situation where your folks are working from home overnight. And you still need to ensure that, the business is operating optimally, right? And I think that's where SD-WAN can help. Some of the emerging concepts that we've heard, obviously, we mentioned a little bit earlier, but if you look at CDN as a concept that could potentially be coming into integration with SD-WAN as we go forward. I think you continue to see more services that are offered standalone as potentially part of like the broader SD-WAN conversation. So I think you're going to continue to see a little bit more convergence beyond where we are today. And I think that's really exciting for all of us. Reason being, and I don't have that crystal ball, as you mentioned, Kelly, but reason being is that we're simplifying manual operations. If you talk about AI and you talk about ML and you talk about where we are just from a technology perspective, I think it's going to give technology teams and also technology leaders the ability to focus on higher level tasks and higher level operations within their business. And then they can pretty much, optimize some of those manual processes that you would typically handle at the edge of the network. So I think it's a really exciting time. I think this year is going to be extremely telling as to where it's going to shake out at the end. And I think 2021 to 2024 are going to be 3 exciting years. So that's my crystal ball that I'll give you there, Kel.
Thank you. And let's jump to Ryan, and then we'll go to Ron.
Yeah, thanks. So I think when we talk about how it's changed over the years a little bit, and from when I started about 4 years ago, for us, it was always around cloud reliability, but cloud adoption 4 years ago wasn't what it is today. So I think the story around this providing reliability for cloud applications is much more relevant now because everybody's just using a lot more of them in general when it comes to Zoom and Office 365, Salesforce, any hosted VoIP system that's out there. All of those things are easy words that everybody understands now, where 5 years ago, hosted VoIP was very new to a lot of people. So understanding where that applied to SD-WAN was a little bit different, where now that's just a everyday term for everybody. So I think that's really how we've seen it evolve, just much more cloud focused and where SD-WAN and not as much around private connectivity all the time. Sometimes yes, but not always around private connectivity. And then when you talk about the recent events with coronavirus and things like that, I really think the work from home reliability need is even more important. We have an SD-WAN solution for home office. I'm sure there are other solutions out there as well, where it's applying that enterprise grade QoS and prioritization to the home office now, where users can have that prioritization for their VoIP, for their Zoom session over their kid at home doing e-learning, or their wife at home doing Netflix or something like that, those types of things that are bandwidth hogs. So being able to bring this technology now to a home office is really cool from that prioritization standpoint to ensure that reliability.
Thank you. And Ron, anything from Aryaka?
Yeah, I think Ryan really hit it there, is that the pandemic has really caused a fundamental shift in business on a go-forward basis. And I don't think we've seen the impact of it yet. I think Charlie made a great point. I think we're going to see it much more into 2021 in a go-forward basis. And because that's going to shift and you're going to see a lot more people working remotely, security is going to be a constant and evolving issue. And I think every company is going to have to face those issues and have best of breed and make sure that everybody feels comfortable with it, because that's where we're going. I mean, you're not going to see, commercial real estate is a very scary business to be in going forward, because I think you're going to see a lot of that shrink. People are going to be working from home. Companies realize that they can be just as productive. And if any product or any piece of an industry is well prepared for it, I think all four, everybody on this call is very well prepared for the future. We have the technology on what is going to help companies evolve and then stay in business on a go-forward basis.
That's true. And Andrew, you follow the SD-WAN industry closely. Any thoughts?
Yeah, and agree with pretty much everybody on the panel. I do think SD-WAN is going to help facilitate, right? Especially now with even going down and running the SD-WAN software, or maybe even on an individual PC, right? Making that a part of the overall SD-WAN, right? You never want to have an employee have to install any kind of hardware at their house. I mean, I have a Meraki sitting on my desk, but not everybody's going to have that, right? Not everybody's going to have, Cato sitting at their home. But, at the end of the day, if you want to secure your end users and make them a part, or at least feel like a part of a network, maybe running it on a virtual instance on a PC and just make that individual quote unquote location. I think that's going to help make things a lot easier going forward. You don't have to worry about VPN tunnels or, remote access client, etc. This would just be an automatic thing that you're now a part of the network. You're a trusted device, and you're a part of the organization again, as if you were in the office.
Thanks, Andrew. And while I have you, from your professional standpoint, the consulting, pre-sales, maybe, what do you tell clients to help avoid pitfalls during implementation or the onboarding process? What are some of those first steps?
Yeah, I mean, first steps always in any kind of scenario is start out with understanding what are your business requirements, what are your technical requirements, what are we trying to solve for. Therefore, then we start to build a solution around that. Again, a well-documented network, right, is critical to any kind of network change. So understanding what you have and again where you want to get to, I think avoids many of the pitfalls that are out there. Again, you never want to start a project and then get to the implementation and start uncovering all of these things that you missed. So again, in my opinion, it all starts with design up front.
Thanks. And Charlie, how does Cato look?
Yeah, what I would say is that everybody on the panel, we all do what we do very well. There's some small nuances between us. And essentially, one of us would be the right fit for any company out there. But my biggest thing is that when I'm talking to an organization, is just I want to understand what their cloud strategy is initially, right? And understand that typically that direction comes from executive leadership, right? And there's a plan in place for the next, call it 2 to 3 years, right? And a lot of times we have prospects that are looking for an organization that can grow with them over the course of the next few years, right? So what we try to do is we say, business requirements, as was mentioned a little bit earlier, but then we dig into how, in working with you, how can we put you and your network in a better position tomorrow than it is today? Help us understand some of the challenges that you're having. Help us understand that problem location overseas. Help us understand that application that's a real PITA that you're still having issues with, that one person in accounting keeps complaining about, right? Help us understand those. And then we define those, and that's really where, SD-WAN makes sense for our customers, right? It's not something we just spread over a network and magically everything's optimized. No, we're singularly solving the requirements that directly is going to impact that company's top line, right? And at the end of the day, with some ROI, potentially their bottom line. So yes, I think it's rigid qualification, but it's understanding where they want to go in the next 3 years. And a lot of times what we find, it's public cloud, it's Azure AWS, it's also UCaaS, and it's also potentially, getting out of physical data centers. And with the pandemic, like Ron was saying, maybe even getting out of branch locations, right? And there's a consolidation that may be coming there. So yeah, that's how we typically engage with our customers.
Deal. And I have Ryan. Can you make a quick comment? I have Joel ready to.
Yeah, no worries. Yep, I think for us, kind of qualifying questions on the front end is what is your cloud strategy moving forward? Like Charlie was just explaining more of that public cloud strategy moving forward, where we fit better, and then what is your security strategy today and moving forward? And that can really, those two questions can honestly put you in a bucket of who that best provider is for you. And for us, we will base ourselves based on that security answer most of the time, where we can either say we're going to be a great fit for your needs, or this is where you need to look at someone like a BCM, an Aryaka, or a Cato instead of BigLeaf. So we're very open about where we fit and where we don't, just for that exact reason.
Great. And not to leave Ron out. Ron, any follow?
No, I agree with what everybody said. Customers should do their due diligence, make sure that they answer the questions that fit for their business on a go-forward basis. And in many cases, make whoever you're going to choose prove what they can do for you. I think that's a very important piece. Get a POC in there and see what's going on and see if it fits what you want to do. Because this is not a short-term decision for these companies. This is really, again, I'm going to go back to what Charlie said. He said it perfectly. We're looking at 3-4 years down the road, and that's what they really have to understand.
Great. Thank you. All right, thanks to all of our panelists. Thank you, audience, for listening. And Joel, I'll turn it back to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Kelly, and to the rest of our panelists. If you have any questions around SD-WAN, or if it might be right for your business or different options that are out there, please reach out to a Tier 4 Advisors team member or to our panelists. And then also, as a reminder, Tier 4 specializes in 5 key areas: data center, telecom, managed services, security and compliance, and emerging technologies. During these unique times, and then also down into the future, we know that projects have been moved up, moved back, or maybe even canceled altogether. If there's any re-architecting or restructuring that we can help assist with in any one of these areas, we'd be glad to reach out to any one of our 700 plus vendors that are part of our network to be able to help you with some of the products that you're working on. But stay tuned for next week, where we will be talking about VDI and DAS, Desktop as a Service, and the top 10 benefits of leveraging such a platform and how you can do more with less. So with that said, again, thank you to our panelists for joining us and Kelly for hosting. We will see you all next Wednesday, and we'll talk to you soon.